Well, hi everyone. Thanks for joining this concept session. My talk is going to be entitled Defending Diversity, Providing Examples from Different Domains Enhances the Application of System Principles Beyond the Domains Covered by the Examples. This has been done in collaboration with Veronica D'Angelo, a PhD student from CONICET in Argentina, and who won one of the diversity awards for this work. So before moving to system principles, first a word on declarative concepts, which is a broader category to which system principles belong. And declarative concepts are abstract concepts denoted by key terms and short definitions, usually 1 or 2 sentences long, that can be applied to a wide variety of scenarios. You can see them in all sorts of textbooks and other ways of teaching. And they are central to instruction as they are prevalent across a variety of educational domains and degrees of expertise. You usually see the key terms highlighted and the definitions on the margins of the pages. When learning declarative concepts, definitions are often treated as the primary targets of learning, under the assumption that once the learner has assimilated the abstract relationships between the elements of the concept, students can rely on the definition for concept application activities such as classifying novel exemplars. But abstract definitions can sometimes be difficult for students to understand, and that's why examples are often put into the learning materials as a way of helping students understand the definitions. The mechanism through which examples facilitate the acquisition and application of declarative concepts are still unclear. One possibility is that they clarify the schemas conveyed by the definitions. For instance, this is an example of the availability heuristic by Tversky and Kahneman, as defined by the likelihood of events based on their availability in memory. But availability is a tricky concept, and for those familiar with tooling, it might relate to having the appropriate information stored in memory rather than the ease of access to that information. So Tversky and Kahneman presented an example with asking people to guess whether there are more words starting with K or with K as a third letter, and wrongly participants assume that there are more words starting with K because they are more easily accessed. So examples of this kind could eventually help disambiguate concepts and get better definitions. But there's an alternative possibility, is that they can serve as base analogs against which new exemplars are matched via analogical mapping. That is, when a new instance comes and is processed in working memory, it could just activate an exemplar stored in long-term memory, and then through a process of analogical mapping, the stored exemplar aids the comprehension of the new exemplar directly without necessarily eliciting the definition of the concept. So if examples are so important for declarative concept learning, how to better employ them? In a recent line of research, Summary and Rousen tested several ways of presenting examples. One was asking participants to generate their own and compared the effectiveness of this strategy against simply presenting 4 examples to participants. In a later study, they asked participants to complete faded examples. That is, they gave first to participant a work example, and then a partially incomplete example, and then they had to complete it, and finally a potential domain where to look for examples, and participants had to locate examples within those domains. This is a kind of scaffolding supposedly helping participants accomplish the task. But the joint conclusion is that best results are obtained when participants passively receive examples rather than more constructively constructing those examples themselves, presumably due to the fact that the constructed examples are not of high quality. So the learning outcomes obtained through this strategy, which is the winner of the strategy, is still far from ceiling, and especially for system principles, that is, concepts like negative feedback, refractory period, or competitive specialization, which are highly relevant for science learning. As they cut across thematic domains, they allow knowledge transfer across domains. So if presenting examples works best, then how to select them? Here we focused on one possible alternative, that is thematic diversity of examples. So in the field of instruction, it's been proposed that selecting examples with mismatching surface features may aid in highlighting the abstract features of concepts, therefore preventing subgeneralization of their definitions. This would work this way. If two examples are presented, this could yield an abstraction that preserves their structure and gets rid of surface features, and this abstraction then gets stored in long-term memory for later access. But some research from analogical reasoning raises doubts that this could work well. The very convergent finding from analogical reasoning is that the only way, or practically the only way, to elicit this kind of abstraction is by having participants explicitly compare two instances against each other. If this is not done explicitly, then participants very rarely do that spontaneously, to the point that when assessing the effectiveness of element of instance comparison, the sequential presentation of two instances without the comparison prompt is the control condition rather than the experimental condition. And then we talked about the other way, the possibility that exemplars stored in long-term memory could be activated directly and help understand a new concept. But again, converging results from analogical reasoning indicate that when items are stored in long-term memory and a new item comes in, then it will only trigger the activation of stored elements that share surface similarity. That is, that they share semantically similar elements or contexts. So all this information raises doubts that educators' faith in providing variety of examples might work. Thus, the main objective of the present study was to assess whether thematic variety in fact enhances concept application to domains not covered by the examples. In case of confirming such advantage, a subsidiary objective was to determine whether it comes at the expense of two desirable features. First, the ability to categorize new instances from studied domains. That is, if I receive 3 examples of inoculation from the medical domain versus just 1 from the medical domain because the other 2 come from different domains during learning, then when facing another instance of inoculation from the medical domain, those who receive 3 different domains may be more unlikely to associate it with the learning set, because in the learning set there was just 1 example instead of 3. And then an eventual advantage of thematic variation could also be at the expense of an ability to reject near misses, some kind of overgeneralization due to having a more open notion of the concept itself. So we work with 5 abstract concepts: distributive specialization, inoculation, refractory period, regression to the mean, and negative feedback. And I'll make you zoom into just one of them. Negative feedback was very broadly defined as a type of functioning that ensures that when the values of a variable depart from an optimal level, said departure activates processes that counteract the deviation. Participants receive these definitions, plus some questions to which I will now turn. And then we generated, for our material sets, different instantiations of this principle, as well as of the other 4 principles, of 2 sorts. First, we came up with 4 examples taken from one single domain. For instance, 4 examples from the domain of engineering, 1 dealing with thermostats, 1 dealing with tanks and floats, when dealing with torpedoes and compasses, and when dealing with batteries and charging systems. And then we developed 3 further distant examples of this principle, one from the domain of biology, that is plant dehydration, one from the domain of psychology, dealing with aggression in non-functional families, and one from economics, dealing with the price of hydrocarbon and suppliers. So, and then we devised a near miss that is an element that shares some structure with the concept, but has some critical differences that make it a non-case of the concept. So, for each of our 5 concepts, we generated 7 cases, 4 from the same domain and 3 further ones all from different domains. So participants in the homogeneous condition received during learning 3 examples from the same domain. In this case, 3 examples of negative feedback from engineering. And when reading each of the examples, they had to respond what will be like comprehension questions about each of them. For instance, for this example, which variable departs from a desired level? In this example, which processes are activated by such departure? Or in this particular example, what effects do the activated process produce? So after 5, and they do this, they receive 3 cases for each of the 5 concepts, all in random order. But it's a block scheme. The concepts are I mean, it's a block scheme in the sense that they receive the definition plus 3 examples from that concept before passing to the next concept. What do they receive during the test phase? They receive, for this particular concept, 4 examples or 4 instances that are related to it. One is a studied example. It's exact one of the ones that were presented to them. This is a measure of whether they paid attention or not to the task. But slightly more demanding, they received a new case from one of the studied domains. In this case, a further case of negative feedback from engineering. The more interesting dependent variable is new instances from domains not covered by the examples. For instance, the hydrocarbon example is different from the engineering domain. And finally, a near miss. So what do they have to do? They receive all concepts in a list, and they have to check whether each of these instances corresponds to any of the 5 concepts plus a none of the above option in case they didn't see a relation to any of the concepts. Participants in the varied condition receive those instances in the brown rectangle, that is 3 from different domains, but during the test they receive the same array of situations to sort. One that is studied, the thermostat example, for instance, one that is a further example from a studied domain, and then a new instance from a non-studied domain and a near miss. So what did we get? We got a steady decrease in accuracy when moving from new items, from studied items to new items from studied domains to new items from new domains. And this is commonsensical in the sense that studied items, they just studied them, and new items from studied domain, they don't know the example, but they know that they are familiar with the domain. And the critical thing is what happens with new items with new domains. So when looking at group differences, we see that people receiving a varied array of examples during learning are better than participants receiving a homogeneous array during learning for extrapolating the concepts to cases that did not belong to the studied domains. So apparently this advantage did not come at the expense of a lesser ability to identify items from studied domains, as seen on the second pair of bars, and it didn't come either at the expense of rejecting near misses, because participants receiving a varied example array of examples were also better than the homogeneous condition for rejected near misses. So there are some limitations of the study. There could be some conceptual overlap between negative feedback and regression to the mean, in the sense that all cases of the former could arguably be considered instances of the latter, and some limitations for the educational application, in the sense that the encoding of the learned items was very intensive and teachers not always have the opportunity to do this. And the sorting task also involves recognition rather than evocation, and therefore allows narrowing the choices by elimination. But in a follow-up study, we replaced regression to the mean by a new concept and remove the comprehension questions and the drop-down menu for selecting, and just ask participants to name the concept to which the instance belonged without having the list. And we basically replicated the same pattern of results. So in terms of conclusions, thematic variety enhances conceptual application beyond the domains covered by the learning examples. And this does not come at the cost of a lesser ability to recognize instances of the concept within the covered domains, and neither at the cost of a greater proclivity to overgeneralize the concept to non-instances having partially overlapping structure. In terms of future directions, we'll further investigate the cognitive mechanisms that underlie the thematic diversity advantage, and also assess whether examples displaying different structural variations instead of different thematic domains leads to generalizing concept application to other permissible variations not covered by the examples. And that's pretty much it for this presentation. So I would gladly take questions.